122 years. That is the astonishing lifespan of Jeanne Calment, a French woman who lived through 3 completely different centuries. She currently holds the ultimate, undisputed record for human longevity, and her lifespan is so incredible, so far outside the norm, that we naturally just assume it's an unbreakable, absolute biological ceiling for the human body.
But what if it isn't? What if dying of old age is actually just a medical myth? Ask any doctor and they'll tell you that old age isn't actually a direct cause of death. Instead, it's just a state that makes us overwhelmingly vulnerable to specific fatal ailments. So the really crucial question here is, what if the physical decay we accept as this natural, inevitable force of nature is actually a biological process, a process we can slow down or, incredibly, even cure? Welcome to this explainer. Today we are going to completely demystify the biological mechanisms of aging. We're going to dive into the cutting-edge science that's trying to not just understand our biological clocks, but actually, literally reverse them.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 1. The reality of aging. 2. The biological clock. 3. The information theory. 4. Hacking the aging process. And finally, 5. Expanding our health span. We're going to journey from the macro-level wear and tear of our organs right down to the molecular software of our cells, before zooming back out to see how we can expand our healthy years.
Section 1. The reality of aging. Before we get into the microscopic stuff, let's start by looking at what aging actually does to the human body on a macroscopic scale.
It's fascinating to look at how our whole body wear and tear actually breaks down. Because aging isn't just one thing breaking, it's a systemic whole body failure. For example, after you hit your 30s, your brain literally shrinks by about 5% every single decade. Your skin sags because critical proteins like collagen and elastin just start to decline. We even get arthritis in the tiny, tiny bones of our middle ear, which is why we lose high-frequency hearing. The fluid in our eyes gets stiff, creating those annoying little floaters, and our blood vessels narrow down, basically starving the heart of oxygen. It's really much like a car rusting out and losing parts over decades of grinding and friction.
But why does the car rust in the first place? Well, to truly understand why this whole body decay happens, we have to zoom way, way into the microscopic level. We need to look at a biological process called cellular senescence. Put simply, this is the condition where our cells just lose their power to divide, grow, and repair damage. They essentially retire.
Section 2. The biological clock. Because it turns out, our cells don't just get tired randomly. They're actually programmed with a very specific expiration date.
Back in the 1960s, a scientist named Leonard Hayfrick discovered something absolutely shocking. He proved that human cells grown in a lab can only divide about 50 times. After that, they stop, they enter senescence, and they eventually die. And the wild part is it doesn't matter if you freeze them and thaw them out years later. They literally remember their count. Today, biology calls this the Hayflick limit.
And a look at our DNA brilliantly illustrates why that limit exists in the first place. Every single time a normal human cell divides, the protective caps at the very ends of its DNA, which are called telomeres, get just a tiny bit shorter. You can think of them like the plastic tips on shoelaces. Once those caps are completely gone, the cell dies. Now, in contrast, cancer cells in certain biologically immortal animals like hydras, well, they cheat. They use an enzyme called telomerase to constantly rebuild those caps. Because of this, they can divide infinitely. Scientists believe our bodies actually evolved to intentionally turn off telomerase and enforce that 50-division Hayflick limit specifically to prevent our cells from dividing endlessly into cancerous tumors. So our biological clock is basically an evolutionary trade-off for staying tumor-free.
But science is always evolving. Welcome to Section 3, the information theory. What if telomere shortening isn't the absolute root cause of aging, but rather just a symptom of a much more profound loss of information?
Over at Harvard, researcher Dr. David Sinclair proposes a totally fascinating framework called the information theory of aging. He points out that we have 2 types of information in our bodies. First, the genome. That's our digital hardware, our exact, static DNA code. And digital information is great because it's easily copied without errors. But then we have the epigenome. This is analog. It consists of the dynamic proteins that spool and unspool our DNA. It acts as the software, telling a generic cell whether to become a nerve cell or a skin cell. And the catch? Analog information naturally degrades over time.
Dr. Sinclair explains it perfectly with this analogy. He likens our epigenome to a compact disc.
As we accumulate microscopic damage from just, living life, the analog epigenome gets scratched. The beautiful digital music, your actual DNA, is still perfectly intact underneath, but the laser starts skipping. Because of that skipping, specialized cells, like the ones in your brain or your retina, literally forget their identity and they just stop functioning properly. That loss of cellular identity, that is aging.
So if aging is simply a scratched CD, that brings us to Section 4, hacking the aging process. Can we somehow polish the CD and restore the original symphony?
The amazing news is we actually have the power to hack our own longevity pathways right now. When we introduce mild biological stress to our bodies, say through intermittent fasting or high-intensity exercise, we lower a specific growth hormone called IGF-1. By taking away constant calories, we shift our cellular machinery away from rapid growth. Instead, our cells hunker down, turn on their survival defenses, and start repairing the epigenome. You are actively telling your cells to go in and fix the scratches on the CD.
And scientists are pushing this even further in the lab. By using gene therapy, specifically a subset of proteins known as Yamanaka factors, researchers have found a way to literally reset the biological age of a cell without accidentally turning into a tumor. In some truly groundbreaking experiments, they introduced these factors into the eyes of older mice and successfully regrown completely severed optic nerves. That is something entirely unheard of in adult mammals. They didn't just halt aging, they put it in reverse.
Which brings us to Section 5, expanding our health span. Because if we successfully translate these miraculous genetic therapies from mice to humans, it's going to require a massive philosophical shift in how we view the entire arc of human life.
The goal here absolutely isn't some sci-fi fantasy of immortality. It's about extending your health span. We have to avoid the Greek myth of Tithonus. He was granted eternal life but not eternal youth, so he eventually just shrank into a babbling grape. Nobody wants that. Curing aging means eliminating that final decade of debilitating sickness, frailty, and suffering. If we can keep people biologically young and healthy into their 90s or even 100s, we don't just eliminate immense human suffering, we also potentially save trillions of dollars in global healthcare costs that are currently just drained managing chronic age-related diseases.
But let's look at a completely different challenge of living a long life, how time actually feels. Think about it. For a 1-year-old, a single year is 100% of their entire existence. It feels massive. But by the time you hit 80, 1 year is just 1.25% of your life. This is exactly why time seems to just fly by as we get older. So, to make an extended lifespan actually feel long and rich, we have to constantly seek out intense, novel experiences. Our brains record new, unique experiences much more deeply than routine ones.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. Statisticians actually believe that the first human being who will live to see their 150th birthday has already been born. Honestly, it could even be you. If the science of polishing our cellular CD really becomes a reality, the most important question you have to ask yourself isn't how to live forever. It's what will you do with all those extra healthy decades? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep pushing boundaries, and I'll see you next time.